Hi everyone, welcome to the chat sphere. I'm here today, ready to welcome Standing Room Luke on. Hold on one second, I'm gonna turn off this fan. All right, and it's off. Here we go. Standing Room Luke is here and entering in. Together. I'm so glad all y'all are tuning in. This is going to be a really fun episode of the Chat Sphere. Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. It's awesome to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
And thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. So, this is the Chat Sphere, which is a podcast, interview, live talk show, chat show,
Mhm.
where we just get to chat about whatever we want. And specifically, I'm really interested to hear about you, your journey with burlesque, and the research you're doing on Chicago Burlesque history. Do you want to
Yeah.
introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, sure, of course. So I'm Standing Room Luke. I am Chicago, one of the many burlesque super fans in Chicago, and the self-certified historian of Chicago Burlesque. I am about halfway through a doctoral program and just starting to research and write what will be from what I've seen, the first written book on Chicago burlesque itself and its history, which is a weird thing, right? There's a lot of histories of burlesque in New York and as an American cultural thing, but nothing about Chicago itself and what it has done for the art form. And it's so strange to me because I found so many moments in Chicago's history where we really helped to set what burlesque would become, even to what it is today. And so many of the acts that we associate with it now and the dance forms and the way it's done as a business. And so that, and I've just been going to burlesque shows myself for the past 5 years, easily once or twice a week, straight, as started with the Drifter Speakeasy in River North and just spread on from there. So I'm just super motivated as a super fan of the art form itself and as an historian to try to bring this art to life and really what our city and our people's contribution has been to it. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for being a super fan. I would definitely describe you as such. And quick question, did you stumble into the burlesque scene at the Drifter, or did you go there because you heard about it?
So I I went to the Drifter after taking a tour there because my brother had heard they did variety shows in quotes over there, and I was just curious to check it out. And that's when I was exposed to burlesque live and in person for the first time. And from there, I got recommended by some of the bar staff there and some of the performer friends to other venues throughout the city and just met other people kind of organically that way. It was funny. I just stumbled into what I had no idea was this vast sort of underground community of artists and freaks that were just all over the city walking amongst us like normal people. And it was, and I mean that in an endearing way, but,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it was purely by chance. And, and I was just happening to go into a PhD program after that. And I decided to write about what I was passionate about at the time and what I knew that there was not enough history written about. So it was all just perfect timing and just good luck, really.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've stumbled down a couple rabbit holes myself, and I really believe that you're meant to find those little rabbit holes whenever they pop into your field. So welcome to it. You are definitely someone that we're all excited to see whenever we step on stage, and we're excited to talk about burlesque with you. Um, so,
Hey.
yeah. So, I mean, I was just at the Drifter last night with Mason Driller, and um, let's see, I did a WGN TV spot for them a little while ago, a couple weeks ago with Shimmy, um, and I was just so floored. You know, I've known a lot about the history of the Drifter, but Chicago has this fantastic history of performance. It was like really uh, like one of the main hubs in the circuit when they were doing the different like vaudeville and burlesque show circuits. And I love thinking that I'm performing in a place that has that history, that so many people had like gone on that stage, and it's literally been serving up entertainment since the 20s. Like that's
Mhm.
100 years, not straight, but you know, it's such a cool thing to think about that lineage. And I would, if you have a good entry point, where to go from there? What kind of history really turns you on and inspires you, like you're saying?
Oh, wow. So I am really attracted to the kind of history that's more like connective rather than a deep dive in any particular subject. And I really love the research I'm doing in burlesque because I feel like it taps into a lot of different issues specific to Chicago, but also like historic problems for the country, really over time, and how those problems like kind of influence how burlesque used to be done like as a business, and what kind of acts used to be allowed on stage, and what was seen as, you know, standards for beauty and sexuality, and how that's changed over time. Like burlesque in a way, uh, as like a historical subject, it's like this big tent that manages to bring in all these subjects together in the way in which they interact with this one niche artistic style of performance, right? So in a way, you can use like Chicago Burlesque to measure the change in time to what our tastes have been in like high and low culture, how we measure things like masculinity, femininity, and beauty, and all that stuff, and what is even considered to be uh, permissible and profitable for public entertainment, and what the city and really the culture is willing to allow people to see, you know? So, yeah,
Censorship at its finest.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, what do you think the thresholds are from the research that you've done versus today? Like, can we get away with more today, or would we have been able to get away with more 100 years ago?
Oh no, there was a lot more you could get away with 100 years ago, easy. Like in the 1920s, I mean, people still debate when the striptease originated and who came up with it. There's a popular story that it happened in Chicago by pure accident. You know, wardrobe malfunctions, they happen all the time. And this
Mhm.
one just happened to happen like on cue and on beat with the music that was going on, and people thought it was intentional. So like the stage manager like told that performer, you have to come back and do that again and again, right? So it kind of picked up and it trended like in the 20s and 30s. And because of that, and back then there just was not as much regulation in Chicago at the time. So there was a lot more just nudity, more nude performance, right? There wasn't as
Hmm.
much coverage or blue laws, you know, requirements back then. They really came down hard on that after the Second World's Fair in 1933 and 34, just because the city thought those shows were starting to give the city a bad reputation and name, so they tried to censor that stuff, you know, to make the city safe for business during the Depression. You know, it's tale as old as time, song as old as time. Yeah.
Um,
So the short answer is yes, it was a lot more, there's a lot more you could get away with back then, and that was just because it was the Wild West, but
mhm.
not so much anymore.
Yeah, it was. It was the frontier still, even if it was the center. So okay, two things. One, blue laws. Will you tell me what is up with blue laws? Because, I mean, I have to abide by them sometimes.
Yeah. So blue laws are laws that require a certain, like a minimal amount of clothing for entertainment venues, primarily ones that serve alcohol, right? So in the city of Chicago, I forget what the exact requirement is, but you cannot bear, uh, nipples or breasts in the same space that has a bar inside of it. So that is why in some venues until before the pandemic, where the bar was located outside the theater space, technically they could bare their breasts on stage, right? But again, there's a chilling effect with those kinds of laws, right? Because that puts a lot of pressure then on other venues to stay safe in their own lane, as it were. Otherwise, they're fearful that the city could come and shut them down. And to be fair, though, it's a lot harsher in other states. As I'm sure you know, like as you travel south to like St. Louis, I believe there's a requirement that you have to also cover like the undercarriage of the breast.
Right. That's
Or
actually
something
the
like
law
that.
in Chicago as well. It's from the nipple boom
Hmm.
to the under. So you can't show the crease and you can't show anything underneath the top of the areola technically. Um,
Yeah,
so
no.
just
And I should
push
I
ups.
should mention, yeah, I know it's bad, but there's also like somewhere I'll have to send you a copy if I can find a scan of it. But Betty Page did like this funny sort of informational packet where she illustrated what the blue laws are in each state with her different outfits.
Uh,
Like so with like different amount of coverage in each state, and I think those are more or less the same still.
right.
So
They're pretty archaic from what I remember.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's the same with the buttocks as well, right? You're not allowed to show the space between the belly button and the pubis or any pubic hair, but you're not allowed to show the buttock crease or the buttock to leg crease. Um, or I think in
Yeah.
Chicago it's none of the buttocks, but in other places you're just not allowed to show like the creases between them. And so there's all this
Hmm.
interesting underwear. What is it? Blue Lawless. Uh, gosh, who makes it? It's a basically a lingerie company that makes lingerie that is uh, up to code with the blue laws. And I actually have only really learned of it because of that, because of seeing all these weird panties. And I was like, why, friend, do you have a strange strip of fabric underneath your bum?
I know. Oh, that reminds me of a very weird trivia fact. In the 1920s and 30s, Chicago produced their own line of like G-strings that were called the Chicago G-strings, and what they were G-strings with mimic pubic hair on it.
On the
Uh,
outside?
yeah, on the outside. So you kind of get the image without actually breaking the law in a way, which is so typical Chicago to find a loophole in something like that.
Hmm. I know. I think about that often, how we glue rhinestones onto the area where
Hmm.
any pubic hair would actually be, um, and pretend that it's glittery and sparkly, which I think is really fascinating. But that is very Chicago, the Chicago G-string, and that just it's like you're naked, but you're not naked. Look at this. This is great, right?
Yeah,
Um,
look it up. It's real.
I believe it. Um, so then I guess the other thing that's crazy to me is that these blue laws are very archaic, but very much like many of our laws, haven't actually been reevaluated and looked at to reflect the modern day era. Um,
No.
so, I mean, there's other ones that are definitely higher priority, that deal with a lot of oppression and racism blatantly.
Sure.
But I feel like it is also time to look at how these things are censored, because the more that we can find the liberation in our own bodies, the more that we
Mhm.
can express ourselves and not be so stuck.
Yeah, and actually there has been a recent case that has challenged like the legality of those laws. In like 2019, this transgender performer whose name I can't remember, she sued the city and she argued that those laws were inherently unconstitutional because they targeted women at a special class of persons, right? Because especially with the requiring topless coverage, like those regulations only targeted women, and she, it's an inherent violation of the Civil Rights Act because it's targeting people on a class of gender, and the city had to settle with her. But they still have not passed anything in terms of legislation to amend those laws, so they're still on the books, but they basically already admitted in court that they're not constitutional, that they should not be a thing. So,
well, there we go. We heard it. City says that it's unconstitutional, and it'll take 100 years for them to do anything about it, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Some of those. So, oh gosh, blue laws was the one thing, and then the second thing, I can't remember where I was going with that. But I guess in uncovering Chicago burlesque, what's the most fascinating thing that you find, or like what's the thing? Okay, what's the most fascinating thing you find, and then I have another question after that.
The most fascinating thing I've found, there's probably two things that come to mind. One is how burlesque in Chicago, early burlesque, was like heavily influenced by things like vaudeville and circus performers and variety things like that. How until there was the striptease, it was really more defined by things like belly dancing, actually, like Little Egypt at Chicago World's Fair. Like a lot of burlesque theaters here and around the country, they imitated her and had their own Little Egypts, following in her example. And then there's figure models who posed as if they're live art, and early nude modeling and things like that. I found a lot of acts that were precedents to what would become striptease, and actually just dancing while nude on stage. It was fascinating to see what burlesque was like before we associated it with, Sally Rand and the striptease and the fan dance. And it's just incredible to see how it changed over time. And I guess the second most interesting thing I found so far in my research is that the most detailed records of what those shows were like back then, they weren't created by people who were fans of it or performers. They were actually kept by people who were surveilling these theaters, who were trying to bring in the police to shut them down. They created all these detailed reports about what the acts were like, what the audience's behavior was like, and that has ironically been some of the most useful information I found so far. But you have to take it with a grain of salt too, right? Because they could be exaggerating all this to tell the mayor these people are moral degenerates who are encouraging prostitution and trafficking and all the charges that are same old today, right? And yeah, but it's just a funny thing, right? It's
it's fascinating. That reminds me of this book that I was reading. So I did the Pussy Magic Burlesque program this year, and I challenged myself to learn a lot more about burlesque history. So I read a whole bunch of books, and that was something in these books, right, that they were talking about, is that most of the information that they had came from the news or really conservative organizations describing the acts, this lewd dancer gyrating her hips with just fringe, and it was just so funny to read that, And then the lady who had written a different book had mentioned that was most of the accounts that they could find, like in historical records, because those are the people, right, who probably put it in newspapers or publications. Whereas I think that this has always kind of been this underground, undocumented thing, probably kind of like today, I assume, for the most part. Small documentations here and there. And so the juiciest stories come from actually contacting, when these humans started contacting the living legends and getting their stories, because they didn't write them down, because they would move out of the striptease life or the circuits and then would go into, I don't know, having a family or something, and they're not gonna talk about talk about their striptease journeys with the other people in the PTA. So it was and in the burlesque legends that I've talked to, they're like, yeah, I don't get to talk about this a lot, because like, who cares? Who wants to listen to an 80-year-old woman talk about her striptease days? And I'm like, me, right? But like, it's not a grocery store conversation necessarily. So I think it's really cool that you're doing this research and getting into it. So other question then, just kind of, but what do you think is the most important piece of burlesque history in Chicago for those of us who are performing in Chicago to know?
Ooh, the most important piece of history. Wow, I would say the most important moment in the history of Chicago burlesque was probably the moment when the industry reached a climax shortly before it got repressed, and that was honestly the Second World's Fair in Chicago, because not just to lay all the credit to Sally Rand and all that, it was what was happening in the city at the time.
Ooh. I think that you, Lucas, I think that you have a spinning wheel of death. Also, hi, Robert Polinar. I'm glad that you popped in. Thanks for doing that. And thanks, everyone, for being here, too. This is really fascinating. I think, yeah, Lucas, you are paused. So let's see when he comes back. But I think that this is such a fascinating conversation to jump into. And it looks like Lucas's internet got off, and so I'll just pan until he comes back. But I think it's fascinating to hear about the history of burlesque in this city, because it is such a vibrant scene. And yes, Regal, you are totally taking notes. I'm here for it. And it's really important to hear where we came from, I guess. And on that note, Bella Sin in Cleveland. Hi, you're back.
So sorry about that.
No, it's all good. The internet does that,
Yeah.
Yeah. So oh wait, hold on one second. I was just saying Bella Sin has a course that she's doing on decolonizing the history of burlesque coming up on September 13th at 7:30 Eastern. And so that is a donation. So check out her site, Bella Sin, and I'm really excited to go to that also, because yeah. But you were saying that the most important thing for current performers to know about burlesque history, you cut off right as you were saying about the climax before the shutdown after the World's Fair.
Yeah, so it was not just what was happening at the fairgrounds, but what was happening around that time around the city, because that was when burlesque as an industry, it was booming back then. They had the most venues in the downtown area. They had dozens of theaters on State Street in the downtown area. That was the epicenter. Yeah, that was the main district for burlesque. That and a handful of others in the West Loop area. I mean, just imagine that today in those areas. So that, and there was also at the same time was a boom period for a lot of venues in Bronzeville that featured burlesque as well as drag. back then, what were called female impersonators before it became drag. Like both of those like reached a peak in like queer communities in Bronzeville and also this district called Towers Town that's like directly west of Water Tower. It's no longer there because it got gentrified the fuck out there, but sorry.
Yeah, it did.
But yeah, so I think those years, like 1933 and 34, were the most important and formative for both burlesque and drag because those were the years of the highest visibility for both of those art genres before what we consider to be the modern day presence. Because back then, was just a peak in like queer culture and visibility before people actually had a firm understanding of what it meant to be, you know, homosexual or just non-straight in general. And burlesque even then offered a safe space for those communities as well because drag artists especially, they emulated the kind of performance of hyper femininity or masculinity on the burlesque stage. Like to them, that became an example to follow in burlesque. And that's why I examine both drag and burlesque in my dissertation, because at the end of the day, I see them both as a performance of gender, like with a satirical edge, right? It's showing the extremes of what our notions of feminine or masculine beauty is, and like why, if you take it to such an extreme, it becomes absurd, right? It's a self-parody in a way. That's something that you shouldn't take too seriously in a way. But that you can also, at the same time, it's weird, you can do that with such grace as well, too, right? And so those years were like a peak of success for both of those and the queer communities that celebrated that. And that's why we saw an immediate backlash in the city, just smacking it down and shutting down virtually every venue in the city, burlesque and drag. Like they pushed it out to the suburbs after that. So that to me is the most dramatic and important moment in the history of burlesque in Chicago, just because it showed like the potential of what the city could have been if they simply let it be, you know. Right. And it was crossroads moment, and now we'll never know what the city could have been like it had they just let it be, let those artists and communities just exist. So it's kind of tragic that way.
Yeah. I mean, and it's also not surprising because Chicago in the Midwest is not, it's conservative. I'll just say that, you know, and they're really worried in so many ways about the people who hold the purse strings to all of the financial abundance, which is what most people chase after. And so they want, like, it's just shown they want to allow those people who have those values, which are usually not pushing the envelope on gender or sexuality or race or artistic expression or spirituality, right? All of these things. Like, they're not into even having that conversation, right? They're just like, okay, we're done here. This is just too much. Someone said that we're done. And it is a fascinating thing to think about, like what could have been. And I wonder if now, kind of like in this resurgence, like we're getting back to that place, like having these conversations on stage. And yeah, Jeff, Illinois definitely reacts without finding facts first. And, you know, it's really cool that we can have these conversations and look at, you know, like pushing the envelope in many different ways, like you're talking with the satire, which is where burlesque comes from. You know, so I wonder if we're, you know, after a period of the dark ages, coming back to that actual artistic expression.
Yeah, I feel like we Yeah, I feel just as optimistic. I think that we are at a turning point for burlesque and drag, and honestly, just the existence and experience of people who don't fit in this city from this point going forward. I think people like, there's that joke about it being like the roaring 20s again, but I think having just come out, well, we're not out of it yet, but the pandemic and just like renewed attention to the uses and abuses of authority in the city and how like it's not always on the side of justice, for especially for the people that this art speaks to. I think there is a renewed fervor and desire to create spaces like this in burlesque and drag that welcome all these expressions of gender, beauty, and sexuality without censorship, without obstacles, and to challenge like the institutions that for so long have been trying to shut these places down, especially the police and the city, for that matter. It's all these issues. It's like this goes back to your question of like why burlesque and how this ties together these issues in society. Like, that's just how burlesque by its very nature provokes. It forces people to examine like these issues like in parody ways. Like it has always mocked things like corruption, like police and authority, and like standards of good taste. And now we are at a moment where we see all of these issues and things have been taken for granted and standards behind them like are being interrogated and rightfully challenged by people because they simply do not serve us. They don't serve anyone. They don't make anyone freer or happier or help them to express themselves in a better way, and they're inherently dishonest. And people are catching on to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to have more people question that, right? Question everything. And especially question and listen to the people who, have been really wronged by this organization that has been slowly fed into the mass humans' ear holes that, they're here to serve and protect. But who are they here to serve and protect, Um, who is it? People with privilege, money, purse strings, probably. But actually, the huge amount of people are like the artists who are pushing the boundaries of things, or the people who are bringing the conversation of the wrongness into awareness. It's important to look at this. I'm usually the human who's like, oh, they're shutting this down. Why are they shutting this down? Let's see why this is important. And I think that the key, which you're highlighting too, is that, right, donors. The key that you're highlighting here is like when something's booming, to really pay attention to it, because normally when these things get really big, then all of a sudden the authorities are like, no, no, shh, too many people are listening. You're going to like wake up too many people to these conversations, shove you down in so many ways, like, I don't know. I've seen it in lots of little micro ways in my life thus far. And I'm sure that you have even more that you've researched.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and just watch. I'm sure as burlesque and drag and all these fringe arts like take off and they gain more popularity and gain more mainstream, like just watch like some of these same institutions and figures try to co-opt it and like try to pretend like they were in on it all the time, all along. And it's just coming, right? A mayoral photo op with like a burlesque cast or something. I would not put that beyond them.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Because people like it in so many ways because it does it, like, especially with burlesque. Turns you on, taps you in, like it's glittery, it's glamorous, right? It's playing towards almost a farcical portrayal of beauty, and it's pushing the boundaries of what we find to be our comfort zones, which then floods us with adrenaline, or makes us feel really good when we like see these very subjective standards of beauty being put out there. And then it also helps us to understand when we see something that we don't necessarily, that isn't like on our mainstream, to also pay attention to that too. But I think that it's that people like it so much because it does kind of like, I don't know, I like to think that when I perform, I get to like sugarcoat it with like a pretty lady thing and pretty dancing, but then like have a deeper meaning underneath that people really need to hear. That's, I think, what vaudeville and cabaret, those really good underground performances, like, when you watch them, there's always kind of these little things, not always, but
Yeah. Yeah, and what's kind of annoying, like when we do talk to like some of those golden legends of burlesque, like some have like criticized like what they've called neo burlesque and like the more political edge of like some of the performers and like of the newer generations, right? But I think they are ignoring like what we've been talking about, how like burlesque has always had this satirical edge to it, like this idea that nothing is beyond ridicule, nothing is beyond challenge, especially ingrained ideas of appearance, how people should behave, and especially authority, right? I mean, there's always been that under the surface. It's just that people have not had as much liberty to be as direct about it until now, apparently. So, yeah. It's a constant body tick. I can't stop.
no, it's not that. I've always wished I had a beard, and so I just stroke it metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good neutral thing. It makes you look like you're thinking.
So thinking then about the history of Chicago burlesque and the parallels today, what do you see, or what stories do you see, and the parallels in what you see in the scene being entrenched in specific scenes?
That is a good question. I think an interesting parallel or change that I see is how, like, as Billison's, you're talking about how she's talking about the colonization of burlesque in history. With Chicago burlesque, one thing I am seeing that's interesting is how, like, a lot of the success of burlesque was built off of fascination with what was seen as like the exoticization of like foreign cultures, right? And then the appropriation of their dance styles and the like. As we were talking about, like belly dance with Little Egypt and the like, and just as well, like a lot of like burlesque choreography back then was appropriated from African American dance styles, especially to jazz and the like. It's always been about appropriation and borrowing like one-sided cultural exchange that way. And one parallel that I see with today, thankfully, it's less of that, but it's more of artists from that culture and heritage reclaiming that, especially in Chicago. Like it's been amazing to see a lot of performers, burlesquers of color, like being able to like perform acts that speak to their own heritage, to their history, things they grew up with, music that they grew up with, that their parents like sang to them, like in bringing that personal edge and narrative and really recontextualizing styles of music and dance that if done by other artists, like that context and that cultural heritage would be entirely lost on. And I'm just thankful that, that is being flipped on its head now, where that culture, that heritage, and that style is being celebrated and performed primarily by the people who are in a position to best appreciate that. And it is much needed change, frankly.
Hmm. And much like needed change for these humans to be embodying it publicly, like in the public eye, for humans to see where those threads actually come from and to give credit where credit is due and not just have that one-sided cultural exchange, which is actually cultural appropriation, especially
Yeah,
in that way. So, who are your favorite Chicago artists who are really embodying that right now?
Jesus.
There's so
Don't
many.
don't put me on the spot. Like this is how I lose friends.
No,
This
you won't lose any friends.
I know. I mean, don't worry, you're safely in the top 10. I know. I mean, just to name a few who I really respect for like the approach and the attention they put in like the choreography and the stylings for it. Uh, Crocodile Lightning easily up there, like because God, everything is ridiculous, especially the costuming and style. Vivi Valens and Miss Bila Rose, they are wild cards every time, and I especially love when they perform acts that very much celebrate like their backgrounds and like culture they grew up with and music that I no doubt know they probably love in their heart of hearts and all that. Um, oh holy crap, there were just so many. Like shout out to Bazooka Joe. Like
Mhm.
I had been working with him before the pandemic because I had hoped to like use him as sort of like a mentor figure and like to as like a baby steps into the burlesque and to understand like what does classical male burlesque look like, burlesque, I guess. And he's as much a wild card too. He's a funny man's funny man. Like you can never predict what he's gonna do on a goddamn
Is he going to be
stage.
a Muppet or is he going to be a Greek god?
I mean, he is a Muppet. Let's be honest. Like, if you cut into that man's arm, it's all foam and silliness. It's yeah. Oh God. Like beyond them, I mean, God. I mean, everyone's just always a pleasure to see. Jezebeli, like her fashion sense is amazing. Like her vintage clothing collection, like the stuff I have, as much as it is now, cannot shine compared to that. It's yeah, but I don't know. I mean, there's no one I could cite who I've been disappointed with as an artist. At least no one that I see regularly. I mean, everyone just brings their own unique twist to it. But I say I usually favor artists who clearly know like the history behind it, like know what the vintage look actually looks like and pulls it off really well, rather than just mimicking it just because they think a fan dance is like the safest,
Right.
they can put on, like the route of least resistance. And beyond that, stuff that just makes me laugh and like joyful at it because it's just pure chaos. Like those are always fun, but you always have to mix those in a show, right? You have to have like one of each of those styles because otherwise it would get boring real quick. So
Right, right. You need to have the texture between.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, Chicago has an amazing scene and has ever since I started doing burlesque, even before within the circus, the vaudeville, the fire spinning, the underground art scenes that, and even the like the studio art scene that I was part of before that. Um, there's something about Chicago and especially Chicago burlesque where everyone is so interested in being their authentic selves or exploring that to any capacity and really bringing that to stage. And something I really admire about the Chicago scene is that we work together. There's no question at the end of that. We work together and we are constantly encouraging each other and we're looking at collaboration rather than competition and learning from each other and asking questions, rather than trying to just one up each other, or doing something better, which we totally do, but it's out of like healthy fun. You're like, oh, I saw you did this crazy thing, so it inspired me to do this crazy, awesome thing. And that's something I really value about this scene and being in it. And I think that it shows in the shows that we put on and the art that we inherently create with deeper meaning and rooted in an ever evolving understanding of history and herstory.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be clear, it's not like we've had road bumps along the way, right? Like the occasional toxic like producers or performers who steal each other's acts or put on borderline racist performances and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think we've gotten better as a community and culture of like calling that stuff out and not tolerating those as industry standards anymore, right?
Right. And
So,
also calling, not always, but calling in those people into the conversation of it rather than just excommunicating them from the scene, which happens sometimes for really,
yeah.
but yeah. Yeah, and it's not without its pitfalls. You're completely right. It's about, I think, not letting it just pass by without a critical statement or a, we're never booking this on stage, you
Yeah.
know, those kind of things. And having that conversation about it too, because I think everything is a conversation because you don't know what you don't know until you know it, until you've been told it and read it. Um, and like going back to the history, so much of this history is lost and is written by the victors, who are the people who shut everything down, right? Who are the white people
Yeah.
who appropriated everything. So there's so much to uncover.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um, so when does your book come out?
Oh God, it's I literally just started, so I've got like another 2 years at least in this program, so it'll probably take that long for me to finish writing it, and then publishing it. You might know a thing or two about publications. That's going to be its own
Yeah,
challenge
it's
in a
like a
way.
4 or
But
5 year project.
yeah, something like that. But I'm confident that there's going to be a broad audience for this kind of thing. I think this has been like pretty ideal timing actually to write this study, not just because of like the roaring 20s and the renewed interest in like vintage American entertainment and whatnot, but also because I think people will want to read and consume history like this that is just not constantly dismal and traumatizing, right? I mean, when I started like this PhD program, I thought I had to be like one of those historians that write about such a serious topic like mass incarceration and things that are obviously important but that are difficult to motivate you to write about because A, what hasn't been talked about already about that, and B, it's just not something you can be very passionate about without just constantly being angry. And the nice thing about burlesque is that it still broadens your awareness and consciousness of these issues in our culture and society, but it doesn't make you want to tear your fucking hair out all the time because it's supposed to be about joy, right? It's supposed to be about constant celebration of self and community. And if you're not sparking that joy, you're probably a bad burlesque artist. I'm sorry. But yeah.
Maybe a poor entertainer.
Yeah, that's more fair.
Yeah.
Label. Yeah.
Because I like to make moody pieces myself, but there's so many times when the venue or the producer is like, hey, we're here to be entertaining, so you need to do something that is actually entertaining. But anyways, to speak to the point that you're saying is so poignant, that burlesque is something that is fun, is playful, and is an engaging way to have these really hard conversations about
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, pick your topic. And it's so cool to dive into it as an art form that has such historical roots of doing so, and that is so
Mhm.
alive today. So any of you who are watching this, go see a burlesque show. Also, go see a burlesque show that's not just a classic bump and grind, just to see the difference. Go see your local produced underground show at a bar. Go see your
Mhm.
local Newport Theater equivalent, to really see what's out there, because there is such a poignant conversation being had. Um, and I know, like myself, I love having these conversations as a performer. And I'm sure if you come see Standing Room Luke in the audience, you'd probably be up for a conversation, huh?
Yeah, sure. Just buy me a drink and I'll fill your ears with like all the trivia that I know.
That's so cool. So cool. So I had one other question about Chicago burlesque specifically, um,
Hmm.
before we sign off, because it has been a minute, huh?
Yeah, it feels like it's gone by pretty fast though.
Yeah. What's your favorite nugget of information about Chicago burlesque? Fun fact.
Oh shit. Gee whiz, there's so many because this is a long ass story already, and I haven't even discovered everything that there is to discover about it. I'd say the funnest fact about burlesque back then. God, maybe it's just like the sheer amount of ridiculousness that they could get away with their performances, not just in terms of nudity, uh, and all that. But when you think about like the sheer amount of props and set design they had to play with back then, and whatever you would consider the golden age of burlesque, right? Whether it's like that Beauty and the Beast act of someone stripping out of a gorilla suit, right, to become like this beautiful woman, right? They steeped to such kind of weirder antics like that before.
Oh, oh, spinning wheel of death. Lucas is frozen again. Um, that's fun. I can't wait to hear more about these antics. But let's see. Oh, yep. Well, Instagram's going to kick us off in about 2 minutes. So if you're still here with us, let's see here. Standing room Luke's coming back in, and then we'll sign off. Thanks for sticking around for this awesome conversation, everyone. And I'm excited to hear what you think about.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry.
Hi. No worries. No worries. Let's see. Stripping out of a gorilla suit.
Yeah, so that was one thing. I'm pretty sure Chicago didn't start that, but it definitely was around here. There's been like recreations with like model American homes, and like the performer is supposed to be like the ideal housewife, but she's obviously undermining all of those expectations with all the stuff going on there. There were It turns out the writing for these shows was a lot more elaborate. Like there would be plots and stories
Hmm.
behind the shows, right? So the acts would be loosely connected to each other. And like even, oh my God, burlesque in Chicago, it used to be a musical genre. Like they would put on like extravaganzas with like a chorus finale in the end, and like a lot more musical. There's a lot more musical and a lot less emphasis on the sexuality thing. Like it was bona fide theater
Right? Because it took place in these
back
big,
then.
extravagant theaters.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's probably the funnest. Funnest is not a word, but the funnest part of like seeing the burlesque back then was just how extravagant it was, and like how regal they tried to make it be,
Hmm.
especially as they tried to hit that peak era we talked about in the 1930s. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So fun. Well, I can't wait to talk to you more about all this. You just are a wealth of knowledge with the research you've done. So thank you for diving into that on behalf of all of us who love burlesque and love Chicago burlesque to unearth all this history. So thank you.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read your book. Put me on the wait list.
Yeah, of course. I'll let you know as soon as it's released. And I just want to say to you and everyone in the community, thanks for welcoming me into this. Like, I know this art form and this is not really built to be welcoming to like people like me, straight, white, cisgender, male, and all that. But nevertheless, thank you for making me feel welcome, like everywhere I go, and I just hope to reciprocate like all the love and affection you guys show to me every time I show up to one of your shows. So thank you very much.
Our pleasure. And you are absolutely welcome to in the community and everything. I think that's something that's so great about burlesque is that it is like you belong here. If you decide you belong here, you belong here. You prove that you are going to show as much love as you receive, then you're here to stay. And it is always a delight to see your face in the audience. So I can't wait till I see that next time. And thanks for everything. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Great. This was great. So, yeah, keep us posted. And all of you who are listening should follow Standing Room Luke because you have great images of the outfits you wear and the food you make. And maybe you'll post some burlesque history tidbits on there soon. Would you be into that?
Yeah, I could do that. I could like put those in as like captions, put that on the photo, the outfits, or maybe it'd be fun if I could like take pictures of venues around the city and like splash those on the pictures. Like
that's a cool idea. Yeah. I would love to see that. I'd love to see that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one thing I'll mention, the beard thing. A lot of those venues that I've been talking about, State Street and downtown, like a lot of spaces are just gone. Like they're totally gentrified, paved over. There's not a lot of like physical locations or places you can go to kind of find and recapture vintage burlesque. That's how far it was pushed underground. But there are still like collections and exhibits around the city that still keep those memories alive with like great photos of what those places look like. And I'm just excited to find more and more and share as much as I can. So, yeah.
I'm excited to see more about it because it really helps contextualize and like bring that physicality of the past into the present so we can move forward to the future. So thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, with that, I guess it's time to sign off. So, bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Bye.